For coming together today for this meeting. I look forward to a good discussion. Mr. President, welcome. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time. Leader Durkin, Leader Radogno, thank you for your time. Obviously, the five of us have met at this table in this room on a fair number of occasions so far this year, both as a group of five, as well as smaller groups, as well as in one-on-one discussions. We've obviously been in very serious negotiations, both to help fix the budget challenges during the 2015 budget cycle, as well as during the current fiscal year. We've also had many good discussions on policy issues around growing our economy, growing jobs, properly funding our schools, restoring confidence in our government, and drive real value for taxpayers. And hopefully today will be another step in that process of a good discussion in the spirit of compromise and creative solutions to move our state forward and make sure that our government is serving all the people to the best of our ability. I know we all share that goal. Today is obviously a slightly different format in the sense that we all agreed that the initial part of this discussion will be open to the public via live feed camera. We have cameras, we have 3 cameras here. They'll focus in on each of us as we speak. And as we discussed and agreed, each of us will take roughly 10 minutes. We'd like to keep it to 10 minutes if it's okay with you, to respect all of us, to move it along and have 10 minutes at the most. One of our staff members will have a little card to wave when there's a 2-minute warning, just so people know where we are in the discussion, as well as a card that he'll hold up to indicate that the 10 minutes are elapsed. And then what we'd like to do then is ask the cameras to leave, and then we'll continue our discussions in private, so we can come up with further ideas that we may not want to discuss in front of cameras at the particular time. And then I know the press is eager to speak with all of us post our meeting today. They've been giving this discussion a lot of attention. The press is gathering outside, and we thought, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, you could go visit with them after our private discussion whenever we finish that, and then Leader Durkin, Leader Radogno, and I will go out and address the media post our discussion today. I look forward to a good give and take. I thought the order that would make sense, Mr. Speaker, perhaps you go first, followed by Leader Durkin, followed by President Cullerton, and then Leader Radogno, and then I'll make a few brief closing remarks. That's all right, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you. Mr. Governor, thank you for bringing us together today. You may remember that at the time of the legislative inauguration, I pledged to work with you professionally and cooperatively. Now, I've renewed that pledge on multiple occasions. I renew it again today. I pledge to you today, Mr. Governor, to work with you professionally and cooperatively. The number one problem facing the government of the state of Illinois is the budget deficit problem. Layered on top of the budget deficit problem would be the structural deficits which have been carried forward from prior budgets, the unfunded liability in the pension systems, the aggregate debt load of the state, and recently, Governor, your announcement that you're actually going to borrow for the operations of state government. You put it all together, and Illinois is awash in debt. Awash in debt at a time where, Mr. Governor, you have committed to spend over 100% of the amount of money that you estimate will be available for this current budget year. I don't feel that we can simply cut our way out of the budget deficit problem. The governor filed a cuts-only budget. It was not balanced. It would have cut medical care services for the elderly, the disabled, and struggling families. It did more harm than good. I strongly believe that we have to have a balanced approach. We have to do cuts, as we did in Senate Bill 788, which reduced spending in the Medicaid program by $400 million. But at the same time, we need new revenue. such as my proposal to impose a surcharge on millionaires for education. The governor argues that we should change items in workers' compensation, collective bargaining, and the prevailing wage before we finalize the budget. I think it's interesting to note at this time that the bond rating agencies which routinely analyze and render opinions on the finances of the state of Illinois have never spoken about workers' compensation, collective bargaining, or the prevailing wage. What the bond rating agencies talk about is money in, money out. And what they've consistently and uniformly said, there's not enough money coming in to pay for the money going out. The governor's advocacy of these non-budget issues, workers' compensation, collective bargaining, prevailing wage, run contrary to the core beliefs of both Democrats and Republicans. Because the advocacy of these issues by the governor would reduce wages and the standard of living for middle-class families and force injured workers to welfare and to the emergency room. In addition, the advocacy of these non-budget issues, workers' compensation, collective bargaining, prevailing wage, takes the negotiations on the budget deficit problem to the extreme. The solution to the budget deficit problem does not lie in the extreme, but rather lies in moderation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate that. And now, floor will move to Leader Durkin.
Thank you, Governor. Speaker, Mr. President, Leader Radogno. Governor, thank you for convening this meeting. Glad to be here. I just want to let everybody know I love my state. I know everybody at this table loves your state. It's worth fighting for. My caucus is willing to fight for it. But let's be clear, be very clear. We are not having this conversation in a vacuum. The situation we find ourselves in today didn't start in January when Governor Rauner became governor. It's critical that we take a step back and put today's discussion into context for the people of Illinois. From 2003 to 2015, the Democrats controlled every lever of power in the state of Illinois. Democrats controlled the governor's office. Democrats controlled the House. Democrats controlled the Senate. Every spending plan for 12 years was Democrat proposed. Democrat passed. Democrat signed. Every tax and fee increase for 12 years was Democrat proposed, Democrat passed, Democrat signed. This did not protect the middle class. Every unbalanced budget for 12 years was Democrat proposed, Democrat passed, Democrat signed. This did not protect the middle class. We have the largest unfunded pension mandate in America, and yet it was the Democrats who voted to skip the pension payments in 2005 and 2006. This did not protect the middle class. Medicaid spending doubled over the last 13 years, but no meaningful relief for our employers, the job creators, the ones who put the middle class to work. The mess we find ourselves in today, including the worst credit rating in the nation, 17 credit downgrades under one-party Democrat control, falls in the hands of the Democrats. Now, Governor, I know you did inherit a mess. You took office already facing a $1.6 billion deficit due to the bad budget that was signed in FY15. But you have been reasonable from the start. You brought the four leaders together. You said, let's work to fix this. We can do this without raising taxes or increasing our debt. You made proposal after proposal. And finally, you and your staff were able to bring the Speaker and the President on board to solve the FY15 problem. A fix, I will add, that was passed mainly by Republicans because we stood up to be counted. We put the majority on the board to fix that problem. So be it. We fixed the problems of FY15, that's indisputable. We put FY15 behind us. You brought everyone together and said, let's build on this success. Let's find a way forward for FY16. Governor, you took a leap of faith. One I must admit that many Republicans in my caucus were a bit uncomfortable with. But you believe that being reasonable and showing a willingness to compromise could lead us to a grand bargain to begin the repair of our state. Democrats want to raise taxes by billions of dollars, as evidenced by the temporary tax from a few years ago, rather than change the way government spends money. That was $32 additional billion dollars over 4 years. It was sold on the floor of the House of Representatives as a way to pay our bills, as a way to put people back to work. Didn't work out. But that's their choice. That's okay. And we just don't agree with it in our caucus. And Governor, rather than just saying no, you said I'll compromise. I'll consider revenue only if and only if there's real structural reform to go along with it. That's a leap of faith. And rather than meet you halfway, our friends on the other side of the aisle ran away. They dug into their trenches, said this was war, and we're not compromising. Hence the summer sessions. Our members sat through weeks of working groups, watching the governor's staff make overture after overture, do everything possible to find room for negotiation. For what? A no on each one of those working group proposals. That was unfortunate. Their plan, I presume, is to defend the status quo. No reforms, no changes in how the state spends the taxpayers' money at the state and the local levels. We're nowhere with pension reform, but I do know the governor and the president both have proposals out there that could save us a lot of money. I suggest we start moving on that. Billions. But this never-ending tax and spending cycle has driven our state into the ditch. I'm sorry, but I've seen this bad movie before. It doesn't end well for the Illinois economy. It doesn't end well for the job creation and economic growth that we strive for. And it doesn't end well for the average Illinois family, the middle class. I hear my Democrat friends holler up and down about the governor's reforms would hurt the middle class. I've been hearing about that for months. Really. Let's talk about the policies of the last 12 years that have left the middle class in ruin. Every manufacturing job driven out, every dollar raised in taxes has been done at the expense of the middle class. Between job losses, higher taxes, reckless spending, shortchanging the pension systems, the middle class hasn't just been neglected, but they've been kicked to the curb. If you like the direction we're heading over the past 12 years, by all means, oppose what the governor is proposing to do. But I don't think the vast majority of people in the state think we've been heading in the right direction. It's the reason we have a new governor. They want something different, and they want it now. I've heard the phrase legislative malpractice before. We talk about it jokingly as lawyers, but in my opinion, it is if we only talk about revenue and we don't talk about reform. Revenue is not the answer. It is never going to be the answer. We are tied with New Jersey for the highest property taxes in the country. Cook County has the highest sales tax in the country. Our pension crisis is the worst in America. We have a structural problem. And until you've restructured the way we operate government at all levels, there will never be enough taxes available to feed government's appetite for spending. And undoubtedly, there will never be enough jobs available to restore our economic stature. I am prepared to bring resolution to this impasse. I have for months. Resolution that is fair to Illinoisans, our employers, and yes, also the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Durkin. Appreciate that. Now, President Cullerton, you have the floor.
Governor, the reason why we're here is because some good government groups sent out a letter inviting us all to be here, and everybody accepted. But we haven't met here and since last May. So I think we should have been meeting more often. So I'm glad we're here. I'm looking forward to negotiating with you, whether it be in public or privately. I'm willing to compromise. But I think we should pledge to continue to meet, because if we don't meet, how are we supposed to know how to reach a conclusion. What if I wanted to surrender to you? Where was I supposed to go? So here I am, and we're willing to talk. But speeches like that, where I totally disagree with most of what you just said, is not helpful in the negotiating process, okay? I can't speak for the last 12 years. I've been the Senate President for 7.5. We made great progress. Together, before you were the leader, we did a capital bill together 10 weeks after Senator Radogno and I got elected, where Republicans voted for taxes too, because it was an agreement and it was good for the state. We made great progress in paying down our debt. The problem has been that you've wanted to pass business-friendly bills, which I understand, but not having a budget is not too business-friendly. We don't even pay our lottery winners after they buy tickets, so people stop buying tickets. Our deficit has doubled after paying it down over those years that you talked about. So we've got to get to work. And so I'm willing to start as soon as possible. And I think when we leave here today, we should schedule some more meetings.
Thank you. President Cullerton, appreciate it. Leader Radogno?
Thank you. Well, I echo everyone else's thanks for having the meeting, and to the good government groups that also encouraged us to get together, and apologize for my hoarseness. It's just something we're going to have to put up with. But I think the bottom line that we're facing right now is that Illinois, and importantly Chicago, are facing the biggest economic challenge that they ever have, ever. Now, it is true some good things have occurred, some in Chicago, some in the state. But in my mind, that's a little bit like saying that this knee looks good or this toenail is growing well, but the patient has a rampant systemic infection. And the question before us, and this is directly to your point, Mr. Speaker, is do we put the Band-Aid or two and take care of the symptoms, or do we treat the root cause? And I obviously have a different opinion than you, and that we also need to treat that root cause. Our state and our major city are sick. We have to do something about it. I believe that the budget quagmire is reflective of the poor economy in the state of Illinois. And it's getting worse. It's getting worse because we're not competitive with the other states around us. We're not competitive in workers' comp. We're not competitive with prevailing wage. Our lawsuit climate is not competitive. Our collective bargaining balance, if you will, is not competitive. Our regulatory environment and the overall tax burden, as Leader Durkin pointed out, is very high here because you have to include sales tax and property tax when you're talking about the burdens that a family faces. In my mind, the consequences of us not being competitive are very, very high. We're losing jobs. We've lost 115,000 manufacturing jobs in the last 10 years. Illinois hasn't added one net job since 1999. We actually today have fewer jobs than we had 16 years ago. And meanwhile, jobs are going other places. It's not that the jobs are disappearing entirely. Since the recession, which is often blamed as the beginning of our problem, Illinois has recovered 16% of its jobs. On the other hand, Indiana, 70% recovered. Wisconsin, 78% recovered. Minnesota, 150,000 jobs in Indiana, 90,000 new manufacturing jobs. We're losing middle-class jobs while others are increasing those jobs. It's well documented by our flagship university, as well as other sources, that Illinois has the highest outmigration rate of any state. And that outmigration is working, tax-paying families and job creators. It's not just snowbirds. When those people leave, it puts greater strain and demand on the expense side of those important and expensive programs like Medicaid. Our middle class is hurt by the policies that drive jobs out of the state. I don't believe this is a union or non-union issue, a core belief or non-core belief issue. It's a middle class issue. We're talking about nurses and hairdressers, secretaries, middle managers who are suffering with the high cost of living here in Illinois. That's the middle class that is not being protected. They're leaving this state or being forced to rely on government assistance, which is expensive for those that are left. What do we need to do? We definitely need to find some common ground in order to make Illinois competitive. I frankly have been shocked at the refusal of some Democrats to engage in any discussion and real negotiation to get the state back on track, and that includes issues that you might determine to be non-budgetary. Despite the 12 years of Democratic control in Illinois and almost 70 in Chicago, some still see no need for real reform. And I say some because at least some rank and file Democrats and lawmakers have shown a willingness to compromise. We've had bipartisan working groups, both formal and informal. They have looked for and found some common ground. That might be a place to begin. Compromise to achieve structural change is an important thing to talk about. The stalemate that I feel that is being imposed upon us by refusing to discuss these non-budgetary items is hurting the state, and it's hurting Chicago and other communities by showing that Illinois is an unpredictable and unstable place to do business. The governor, and I believe the Republicans, have entered this process in good faith. We are ready to take hard votes. I give the governor particular credit in his signaling his willingness to negotiate. Early on, he took out one of the most perhaps explosive elements of his plan, and that is the empowerment zones or right-to-work zones, knowing full well that many manufacturers won't locate in a non-right-to-work state. But that is off the table. We're not even talking about that. But he also modified his local control proposals based on Democratic feedback that came out of those working groups, agreed with President Cullerton's consideration model with respect to pensions, tried to meet Democrats halfway on work comp and lawsuit reform. We recently compromised on child care and on the Don scores. The governor helped negotiate the unemployment insurance agreement with business and labor and reached collective bargaining agreements with several unions, including trades, Teamsters, and SEIU. Now, it's my belief that we can get an agreement that's good for Illinois if you want to. I believe that most of the state is ready, with the exception of a few special interest groups. I think everyone wants agreement. The status quo in this state and in Chicago is unsustainable and it's unacceptable. The changes being suggested are reasonable. They are not extreme. They move Illinois in line with other states so that we can compete once again and become the powerhouse in the Midwest and the nation that we once were, and frankly, that we deserve to be. There's no doubt that some special interests, especially those with a financial stake in the status quo, won't like these changes, and that's on both sides. But over many years, legislative actions have put the special interest over the interests of the taxpayers and the job creators, and they've hobbled the state. It's time to rebalance those interests. That's what we're talking about doing. My caucus and I stand ready to help, and I know at least some in every caucus do as well. It's December, and I sincerely hope that we don't have to wait much longer. I too look forward to more meetings and real negotiations on some things, and nothing should be off the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Radogno. Thank you very much. I'll just make a couple closing remarks and then we can move to the private session. Mr. Speaker, I think you summarized our challenge very well. As you pointed out, we've had years of financial challenges for the state, long time. I would argue decades of financial mismanagement, bad decisions. We kicked the cans on pensions, we took pension holidays, we cut our school funding. Our kids are our #1 priority. We should never do that. We've pushed employees to take early retirement, which all that did was move the problem into the pensions rather than dealing with it on a budget basis. We didn't pay bills. We just let them accrue, and a lot of those take 12% interest. This has been going on for decades. This is not new. And if we don't take on the structural causes of those problems, if all we do is raise some taxes and maybe make a couple of modest cuts, we'll still chase our tail. We'll keep raising taxes, have more deficit spending. And here's the bottom line. We have fewer jobs in Illinois today than we had 16 years ago. And in that meantime, government spending has gone through the roof. the math doesn't work. We got to take on the structural challenges, and that's the reason I'm advocating for significant reforms. And I'm willing to raise some revenue with you as part of the negotiation. I'm willing to do some things to help the city of Chicago, because Chicago is suffering from exactly the same problems, maybe worse than the state is. Chicago is part of the state. We should try to help. We have mutual benefit by helping each other. And compromise will be the key. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully disagree that any of our ideas are extreme. Every idea we're proposing has been done by other states to quite successful result, has been done by the federal government in their management process. We've just got to deal with this. It's not extreme. When we say these are non-budget issues that I'm proposing, I respectfully disagree. They all tie to the budget, because if we're not growing our economy, we have too much debt. We can't grow. We have to grow our way out of our debt, and we're not growing. And our reforms get to growth and restoring confidence in the government by the business community, so they'll come here and invest and hire our working families so their wages can go up and we'll have more prosperity. So not extreme. They are very directly tied to the budget. And even if some would argue some of the government reforms I'm advocating aren't budgetary or even indirectly budgetary, I would respectfully remind us all that we passed over 500 bills this year, 500 bills, and less than 100 of them had direct or indirect ties to our budget. So it's not like we haven't been willing to pass a lot of bills that are not budget. And every one of the reforms we're advocating are critical to our long-term prosperity. I'd like to, in closing, summarize 3 of the most important reforms I'd like to advocate as part of our ongoing negotiations. One is redistricting reform. The second is term limits. And the third is true property tax relief. Let's just briefly on those 3. I think they're critical. And the good news is they're bipartisan, huge support for all 3. First, on redistricting reform, we have a system that's gerrymandered districts that support incumbents. Incumbents are protected. They don't have to represent their district necessarily particularly well. The district gets customized. Our politicians pick the voters don't pick our politicians. We have bipartisan support. Bill Daley, leading Democrat in Chicago, and many other Democrats support redistricting reform, strong bipartisan support. It's good government reform. It can restore confidence of the business community, employers, as well as working families, that government's working for them. We can have competitive general elections. I think we should get redistricting reform to restore confidence in our state government. Term limits, very similar. Even President Obama has spoken very positively about the benefits of term limits to restore good government, help root out conflicts and corruption, and restore a confidence in the way government works. We have bipartisan strong support. Democrats in Illinois strongly support term limits. Republicans support it. Independent voters support it. And term limits and redistricting reform are easy votes. They're both very popular in both political parties. Easy votes for a legislator who is voting for their district and their people, not for themselves. And I would ask us all, let's vote for the next generation, not the next election. That's my request. Term limits, very important to restoring confidence and growth, and redistricting reform as well. Then let's get to what I believe is the biggest economic burden that we have today, and that's our property taxes. We have the highest property tax. We in New Jersey have the highest property taxes in America. As I speak with small business owners, as I speak with homeowners around the state, they all bring up property taxes as their number one challenge, their number one problem. And we've got to deal with it. And frankly, if we deal with it well, that will free up resources that we can put to help fix our state budget, and also restore confidence in the business community to grow more jobs, and we can get rising family incomes. We've got to take on our property tax burden, in my opinion, and we should do it now, not later. There are 2 keys to having true long-term property tax relief. One is increasing state support for education. I think we're last, actually. We're dead last for state support for schools. I'd like us to change that together and increase state support for schools. Our kids should be our number one priority. And I think we should emphasize lower income districts and smaller districts when we increase our state support. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, we've tended to cut school support rather than raise it. I want us all to raise it together. That's a budget issue. It's actually going against the deficit that we're all trying to fix. But I think it's the right thing to do. It's the right priority for our spending. But the other key to getting a handle on our property taxes is to give local control of government costs. And this is a critical issue. I realize that there are some speaker who may agree with you. They don't mind having higher property taxes to pay their construction workers more money when they build a school or build a taxpayer-funded building. Many people in Illinois agree with you. Let's pay higher property taxes to pay a higher required wage on a construction project. Fine, but many don't. And all I'm asking is, the folks who agree with you, let them keep doing it. Have them have higher property taxes and pay more to build their schools and their city halls. Fine. But the communities that already have too high property taxes are struggling. They can't keep up. The families in that community can't afford their property taxes, and they want to have some modification on prevailing wage. They should be entitled to do that. The community belongs to them. 41 states restrict prevailing wage. So it's not extreme. It's not out of the ordinary. Frankly, it's very typical. Same thing on collective bargaining issues. Again, many people in Illinois, Mr. Speaker, would agree with you. They say, I don't mind paying higher property taxes. I want to collectively bargain every issue with the folks inside government. Fine, keep doing it. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but they should be able to decide. They shouldn't be forced or mandated by Springfield. They have to bargain everything. There are many people in Illinois who would agree with me. They say, Governor, I'd like to get control of our local property taxes. I'd like to, if I have to, take a certain thing out of collective bargaining and just decide it unilaterally as our city government or as our school district. I believe they should be entitled to make that decision. You shouldn't decide, I shouldn't decide for them, they should decide. If they agree with you, they'll bargain everything and have the property taxes go higher. If they agree with me, sometimes they'll take some things out and they'll be able to reduce their property taxes over time. We have already done that. I believe, Mr. Speaker, you've done that for the city of Chicago, voted to take certain things out of collective bargaining on behalf of the city of Chicago, and also allowed independent outside contracting of certain government services that used to be done by inside government providers. We've done that for Chicago. All I'm saying is take the mandate off, let each community handle that issue for themselves. It'll allow us to do a true property tax freeze for a couple years. I believe the President's caucus passed a property tax freeze for 2 years as part of a bill. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, your caucus has passed, as part of an amendment to a bill, a 2-year property tax freeze in an amendment form. And that's great. I thank you for supporting a property tax freeze, but it only has value, it only has validity if there's local control of costs. Because if we only do a freeze for 2 years and nothing else, the property taxes will pop through the roof in year 3, 4, 5. It's not a real reform. It doesn't really help the families that need property tax relief, and it doesn't help the small business owners that need the competitive relief so they can grow jobs in this state. So I would ask us, as part of our discussions, let's restore good government and government confidence with redistricting reform and term limits. It's bipartisan, strong support for the voters of Illinois, and let's give local control to the people of the state. Those residents in Illinois who agree with you, Mr. Speaker, they can keep doing what we're doing on bargaining, bidding, and contracting. If they agree with me, they can choose a different route and get some handle on their costs, but let's have folks free to choose. It's bipartisan, I think, good government, and it's a way we can get property tax relief that will help us then fix our growth, create more jobs, and help deal with the deficits we're dealing with at the state level. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for speaking in front of the cameras. I know it's not always easy or a standard part of the process, but now I think we'll end the public portion of this discussion. We'll ask the cameras to leave, and then we'll continue our dialogue in private. Thank you.